Ladies and gents, hello and welcome back to another video. Today we have a 2018 MacBook Pro. This is the 15-inch model, and we're going to be talking about if it's worth it here in 2025. We're going to go over the specs, the features, externals, internals, run some benchmarks, do some gaming. We're going to export a video in Final Cut Pro, and we're going to see how does this thing hold up in 2025. So first things first, let's see what specs we've got. This is the base configuration model. That means that we have a 2.2 gigahertz 6-core i7. That's an 8th gen CPU, Intel UHD graphics 630. That's paired with the AMD Radeon Pro 555X with 4 gigs of VRAM, 16 gigabytes of DDR4 memory, and we're running macOS Sequoia 15.2. So this is the cheapest model you could get in 2018 when it came out. Now let's go over some of the configurations you could have gotten or are still able to get if you're picking up one of these used. You can go silver or space gray. My model is the silver. And we've got down here the CPU configurations. You could get that 2.2 gigahertz 6-core i7. That's what I have. You could bump that up to a 2.9 gigahertz 6-core i9. And as a mid-tier model, you've got a 2.6 gigahertz 6-core i7. So 2 i7 models and 1 i9 configuration. That i9 is a little bit faster, but it's quite a bit hotter. We'll talk about that here in a little bit. The base storage was 256 gigabytes, but you could go all the way up to 4 terabytes. This was the first MacBook Pro to feature that 4 terabyte configuration. Up until then, you had been limited to 2 terabytes. 16 gigabytes came standard, but you could pay extra and go to 32. This was also the first MacBook to feature 32 gigabytes of memory support. For the graphics, the 555X came standard. That's got 4 gigs of VRAM. You could upgrade to the 560X, also 4 gigs of VRAM. Or if you really wanted to spend some money, you could go with the Radeon Pro Vega 16 or the Vega 20. These were quite a bit faster than the 560X, but they were quickly overshadowed next year with the 16-inch MacBook Pro. If I remember correctly, that 16-inch MacBook Pro's base configuration graphics was faster than the high-end Vega 20. So something to consider when you're looking at a used MacBook is the differences there. That's going to do it for all of the modifications or upgrades you could get on this MacBook. Now let's talk about the external design. Now this looks very similar. It's a 2018 MacBook Pro. It shares the same design as the 2017, the 2016, the 2019. They all look identical. You've got 4 Thunderbolt ports. These are USB-C, Thunderbolt 3, headphone jack over here on the right. Of course, there are 2 ports on each side. This MacBook is very thin and it is pretty light. It's actually thinner and lighter than the new generation of Apple Silicon MacBook Pros, at least the 14 and the 16 inch. My unit is a little dirty, as you can see. I'm not sure what this is, but I should probably clean it off. And the trackpad and palm rest area is also kind of dirty as well. All right, that said, we've got a 15.4-inch Retina display. It's a nice panel, it's LCD, it's fairly bright. I think 500 nits. If I'm wrong, I'll put up the correct number. So this was the first year that Apple introduced a True Tone display on the MacBook Pro. You can see we are able to toggle that on and off, and you can tell that it did change color there just briefly. So that's something that's very nice. True Tone is a very overlooked feature. Once you've got it and you go back to not having it, you can tell right away and you will miss it. All right, so down below the display, we have the butterfly keyboard, which you either love it or hate it, or maybe you're somewhere in between. Personally, I think it's just fine. I used one of these MacBook Pros for several years, never had any issues with my keyboard. I think if you treat it well and don't eat food and get crumbs on it, then it'll hold up just fine. The 2018 is a softer feeling butterfly keyboard compared to the 2017, 2016, and 2015 versions that had this. That said, if you get a used one, it's kind of hard to tell. You don't really know what you're getting yourself into. One way to kind of figure out what the keyboard's going to be like is to look at the battery cycles. Then you can see how used this MacBook is. We'll talk about mine in just a moment. Above the keyboard, we do have the touch bar, a feature that I miss on my Apple Silicon MacBook Pro. Very nice, and it adapts to the different applications that you're using it on. I think it's pretty cool. I wish they would have kept this. There's certainly enough room for function keys and a touch bar, definitely on the 16-inch MacBook Pro. Below the keyboard, we've got our Force Touch trackpad. This is probably one of the best features modern MacBooks have. Fantastic to use. If you never used a Force Touch trackpad, it is a real treat. And if you're used to it and you try to go back to the old ones, well, it just feels very antiquated. All right, that's pretty much going to do it for the externals. It's a thin and light MacBook, at least for its size. We don't have a glowing Apple logo on the back. That was removed in 2016. But overall, I think the external design of this thing is fantastic. You do miss out on MagSafe. That's not present here. There's no HDMI port and there's no SD card reader. So those are some things you lose out on compared to actually the previous and the next generation. So this thing really did not have many ports at all. All right, let's get into the numbers here. So I went ahead and I ran Geekbench 6, and we're gonna pull up the results here. Here are the results. Single core came in at 1262, multi-core at 4869. This is one of the fastest Intel MacBook Pros. It gets beat by the 2019 15 and 16 inch, but overall pretty respectable in terms of what you can get for an Intel MacBook. Comparing this to anything with Apple Silicon, and these numbers begin to look really low. Even an M1 is close to 2,000 here and close to 8,000 on the multi-core, so big difference there. Moving over to graphics, I ran the Metal test using the Radeon Pro 555X, and our score is 17,420, puts it about on par with Apple's M1 built-in GPU, so those go neck to neck. All right, enough well, actually, we do have one more benchmark that I forgot about. It is the disk speed test. So this is going to show us how fast that internal SSD is. Write speeds are around 1,300. Read speeds are closer to 2,500. Again, quite a bit slower than even a base configuration M1 MacBook. I do believe the higher tier storage options do increase the read and write speeds. Could be wrong about that, but typically the larger drives use more NAND chips, so the write speed will increase. The read speed might not, but overall, it's a very fast built-in drive, and you really should not notice any slowdowns on this computer as a result of that. All right, now we're gonna fire up some games. We're gonna run Minecraft, and we're gonna run Planet Coaster. So let's get these loaded. All right, here we've loaded into a creative world on Minecraft, and we're gonna go ahead and fly around. So the world is pretty smooth and it is loading in very quickly. It is really not that laggy. It's not quite hitting 60 frames per second. Looks like we might be in the 30 to 40 range here. Maybe if I drop down the resolution, and we are not, could be an issue with Minecraft. Sometimes the resolution does not change like you want it to, but the game is loading pretty well, in the sense that the chunks are rendering in the distance just fine, but it does feel a little bit laggy when I'm looking around. Let's drop down to the ground and see how this would feel if we were in survival mode. We could probably turn down the render distance here. If we drop that down to 12, then it is actually quite a bit smoother. We're getting much closer to that target 60 frames per second, which is the max this display is capable of outputting, and it's also what I'm recording this video at, so it should appear pretty true to life. Overall, very playable experience. It is not as smooth as newer computers, but in terms of Intel MacBooks, this is towards the top in terms of how Minecraft is going to play. Certainly playable, but if you're really trying to stretch that render distance or play at higher resolutions, or if you're playing at a higher frame rate, if you have an external monitor that supports that, I think you're going to run into some slowdowns. But overall, very playable experience, and I can definitely recommend playing Minecraft on the base configuration 2018 15-inch MacBook Pro. Next up, we are going to launch Planet Coaster. Now, this is not a game I've spent very much time in, but I'm going to load into a world here, and we can see how well it performs on our MacBook Pro. This is also going to give us a really good chance to check out the fan noise, because the thermals on this model are not the best. All right, here we are inside of my Planet Coaster map, and trying to figure out how to look around. So it is fairly smooth. Again, I haven't really played this, so I'm not exactly sure what to look at for you guys. But if we zoom in here where there's more stuff going on, like the people running around, we got some trees and plants and stuff, it is pretty laggy. Definitely not 60 frames per second, more like 20 to 30 if I had to take a guess. But zooming out, I guess the results are kind of the same. This is a very GPU intensive game, and unfortunately the graphics on this computer, while they are good for the time, compared to what we have today, they really don't hold up that well. And I think something like a 14-inch MacBook Pro, even with the M1 chip, would do quite a bit better than this thing is here. But I do think it's playable depending on what kind of experience you're looking for. I have this set at, I think, I'll show you guys. We've got the resolution at 1680 by 1050, and the preset graphics are medium. Maybe if I turn this off, we will get better results. Yeah, so that actually feels quite a bit smoother there, but as you can tell, it does not look as clean, and we actually have some artifacts here. I'm not really sure what's going on with that. So take that information as you wish. Planet Coaster, definitely playable, probably not the best experience in terms of visual quality. And real quick before we go, the fans are spinning up. I'll let you guys have a listen to that. So if I go ahead and spin that microphone around, this is what it sounds like from the distance my iPhone is. And if I move the microphone down towards the keyboard, that's how that sounded. Certainly audible sitting at a normal distance from the MacBook. It's pretty quiet right now where I am. And if you're in a very quiet location trying to play a game or do some editing, you will definitely hear the fans on this MacBook. All right, now what I want to do is edit a video in Final Cut Pro. We're going to do a few short modifications and then we're going to export it to the desktop. I'm going to do that on this MacBook, obviously, but I'm also going to do it on my main editing computer, which is this 16-inch M2 Pro MacBook Pro, and we're going to compare the results. All right, so what I've done is I've dropped in a video clip here. It's about a 5-minute unboxing of an Apple Watch I did some time ago. It's a 4K 60 FPS HDR video file, and I took half of that clip and I slowed it down 50%, and I took the other half and I added a basic title to it. That's really going to stress the GPU on here. Background render is turned off, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to render that and put the time it takes to render, and then I'm going to export it and put the time it takes to export. I'm going to do that on this MacBook as well as my M2 Pro 16-inch MacBook Pro, and we're going to compare the results. So I'm going to go ahead and speed through that, and I'll put those numbers up once we finish. All right, the results are in from the render and the export test. So the 2018 MacBook Pro took close to 10 minutes to render the video clip, and then it took 7.5 minutes to export it. The 2023 M2 Pro MacBook Pro took, I think it was 2 minutes. I can't actually remember. I'll put the number right there. That's how long this thing took to render it. And then it took 3 minutes and 16 seconds to export it. So massive difference there. And this computer got very hot. I had to plug it in. The battery was dying. It was just not a good experience, but it did get the job done without any problems. It just did it pretty slowly. So let's go ahead and move this powerhouse out of the way. I'm very thankful to have this to edit my videos on because it makes it so much faster and saves me a lot of time. That said, you can definitely edit videos on here, although I would recommend maybe staying away from 4K 60 unless you've got a lot of time to kill, because it's going to take a while to edit and export. Something else I want to talk about here is macOS support and Windows support. So because this is an Intel MacBook Pro, it does come with Boot Camp Assistant. That means that you can natively install Windows 10 and Windows 11 on here. You can partition the internal SSD and split the operating system between macOS and Windows. That said, the 256 gigabyte storage is a little slim. You're not really going to be able to use much on either partition. So if you're really interested in doing that, I'd highly recommend getting 500 gigabytes or more. On the macOS side of things, this is running macOS Sequoia, and I firmly believe this will be the last major macOS update that this MacBook Pro gets. And honestly, I think pretty much every Intel MacBook Pro is going to finish its software support here on macOS Sequoia. I think maybe the 2020 iMac and the 2019 Mac Pro might get another year of support, but I think this model for sure is going to be cut off next year, or actually this year at WWDC when they announce macOS 16. So typically what happens once macOS comes out and a computer is no longer supported, the prices tank. They'll drop by anywhere from 25 to 50%. They get a lot cheaper because people really need that macOS support. You can use OpenCore Legacy Patcher, but I think once Apple completely transitions to Apple Silicon, that feature is going to go away, and I don't think we'll be able to patch macOS on Intel models when the current version only supports Apple Silicon, because the framework and the low-level stuff is so different. So for now, macOS Sequoia And I think that's where this thing is going to finish its support. So overall, should you buy one of these in 2025? I think the answer is probably not. These are still going for anywhere from $300 to $400 and higher depending on the configurations. And for that price, you can pick up an M1 MacBook Air. And there are a few trade-offs there. You lose out on some ports, you lose out on the screen size, you don't get the Windows support, at least not natively, but you do get better battery life, you get better macOS support, and it's a lot faster in terms of its raw performance. So I would only get one of these if you absolutely need Intel, or if for some reason you really have to have that larger 15-inch display and are willing to sacrifice battery life, thermals, macOS support, and performance all in the name of a larger display. So I think it's still a very good computer, but it's not so good at very demanding tasks. It does have that dedicated AMD GPU. It's got a 6-core 8th gen i7. So spec-wise, it's not bad, but in the reality of where Apple computers currently stand, getting an M1 chip or newer is just a better choice, and it makes sense in almost every use case. So there you guys have it. Leave me a comment down below. What are your thoughts on this 2018 MacBook Pro here in 2025? Is it still worth it, or do you think it's time to say goodbye to these older Intel MacBooks? Thank you guys so much for watching, and as always, I look forward to seeing you in another one of my videos.